You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Termina هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, 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 golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
So the league office has made a determination, Kevin, that if we fail to talk about the All-Star game over the next 2 days, we will be suspended from Friday's show.
Okay, well, I guess we're going to have to talk about that game. Arsenal's coming to, the country.
Yes, they're coming to the United States anyway, to San Jose to play in the All-Star game. We will have some All-Star coverage, somewhat reluctantly, but nonetheless, we'll talk a little bit about the game. But the one rule I did want
to... Between you and me, Dwayne, what we do best is talking about games, dissecting games, and talk about issues and actual, importance of game and points and standings, all things that are NA. You know when you have some things in a drop-down list, NA non-applicable, this is how the All-Star game feels for me.
Yeah, well, it's an exhibition game, and they've made things worse, MLS. And this is what I'm going to talk about the All-Star game today real quickly, is that yesterday it came out that they've decided to follow the lead of the National Hockey League, which is never a good idea, folks. If you're going to follow a league, never follow the idiots that run hockey. They don't know what they're doing half the time. It's a bunch of good old boys that, anyway, this is my hockey stuff coming out here, regardless.
I have to agree with you here. Exactly.
Yeah. The puckheads will make decisions that make no sense, and people will follow them. Anyway, MLS has decided that they're going to suspend, would be a harsh way to put it, not allow players to play in the following game following the All-Star game if they miss the All-Star game and were selected. So basically you'd be suspended for just that week, though. It's not suspension. Like if you're legitimately injured, you technically wouldn't be allowed to play in that week, but you're legitimately injured anyway. However, if you just had a little knock and you were normally going to sit it out, they're going to force you to play. And that just seems ridiculous to me.
Exactly. Maybe they're not going to force you to play, but they're going to force you to show up, spend a couple of days, and maybe even play a game of FIFA 14 against Macklemore. I'm exaggerating. This is DeVio a few years ago. But looking at the All-Star game, look at Laurent Simon, an example. He's really training and getting ready to play that game because he doesn't want to miss his team game after, because he knows 3 points are important for the standings for the Montreal Impact. So he wants to get fit and ready to be sure that he's there and maybe play a little so he can actually be available for the game after.
Yeah, and look, there's unlimited subs, so the possibility is you just sort of go to the manager and go, I forget who was managing the game. It'd be the MLS Cup champion winner last year, so it'd be Mr. Porter. Yeah, it'd be Porter, I suppose. I don't actually know that 100%, but that's how it tells you how much I pay attention to the All-Star game. We'll even watch it probably because we do the show, but I'll be more interested in watching the homegrown. Anyway, he'll probably just go to Porter if it is in fact him and go, can you just put me on for 2 minutes at the at stoppage time or something so that I don't get suspended, and that'll be that. I sometimes wish that one of these big teams would just come and blast the MLS team one of these years so they stop playing this format and they stop doing this game, because playing against a bunch of All-Star games that are indifferent. If the European teams were actually motivated to show them up, they could. And I kind of wish that they would do that one year so that we'd stop having to talk about this damn thing. But I have a feeling that we won't, that won't happen, and that we'll be talking about this for years and years and years and come, because the league likes it, because it can give away tickets to its corporate partners, and they can have a schmooze fest, and they can drink expensive wine for free and do all of the good stuff that they like to do to schmooze their corporate partners, which is really what an All-Star game is all about. The game is just the thing that they throw out at the end for the fans to pretend that that's what it's all about.
Yeah, but I have to say, though, if you're looking at outside the game, the fan gathering, the celebration about the game, the gathering of journalists, conversations, issues that are being talked about, the outside the All-Star game is actually, I think, is quite valuable. So we have to find a way to do an All-Star game without doing an All-Star game.
Yeah, they used to do it twice a year, right? They used to have that kind of schmooze fest, that kind of gathering of the people, the call to arms, so to speak, at the MLS Cup as well, because it was a neutral venue. I was at the 2010 MLS Cup here in Toronto, and I was in part of those things. There was a bloggers roundtable that I remember being invited to, and that was we had a conversation. It was a bunch of the 2010 at that point too was still when blogging was a lot. I think it was more influential at that point. A lot of the bloggers have moved on and do different things. Like I mostly podcast now. Guys like Jason Davis, they're doing their thing. And, for Sirius, you got lots of other folks that have moved on to NBC or whatever. They mainstream, most of them, right? Or gone to a different format. And back then, though, they were a big influence. And we ended up getting like an hour with Don Garber, which was a big deal. And there was used to that. But like I said, that's it's nice to have that sort of stuff. Maybe the draft is a better place to do it.
Yeah, I think the draft is that now as well, because there's a gathering of people and a lot of like a conference almost, or a convention type of feeling to the draft. And just to go back to your original questioning, Dominic Kinnear, head coach of the San Jose Earthquakes, the host of the MLS All-Star Game in 2016, is the head coach of the team this year.
So they're just letting that makes some sense. Just let the home guy coach it.
Yeah, since 2013, that's been the case.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why the hell not? It doesn't really matter one way or the other. All right. Look, a few rumors we're going to talk about today in the first part, and then the rest of the show is going to be dedicated as follows. We're going to talk about Drogba because this is the 1-year anniversary of Drogba signing with Montreal. So Kevin and I are going to have a discussion, talk about sort of his best moments in Montreal, have a debate whether he's the best Montreal athlete ever in any sport. That's an interesting question to ask yourself. He's clearly at the end of his run, but don't answer it yet, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah, you can wait. We can wait. It's the next block. But anyway, it's an interesting debating point. It's irrelevant, really, but it's a fun kind of barstool conversation to have and other stuff like that. So it's 1 year of Drogba, and sort of we'll discuss where we think it's going to go from here and whether it's going to end at the end of year 2. We'll talk about all that in the second block.
We're going to talk about as well a statement from the chairman of the Tampa Bay Rowdies. Go to rowdiesoccer.com. You will be able to find the article if it hasn't been pulled yet. Quite an interesting read, and we'll talk about this later, criticizing refereeing.
And Espinola Gate, because the Whitecaps apparently don't have their man. So we'll talk about that as well. Let's move to some rumors here. Our friend Anthony Tertera, I can't get his name out of my head today. Kevin, help me.
Anthony Tertera of Red Card Radio.
I work with Anthony. I get Tatila I have in my head today. Tertera. Anyway, Tony reported today that TFC is after the Argentine midfielder Blanco. That would be a pretty big gap for them, creative number 10. But I hear this and I trust Anthony. I know Anthony's hearing stuff that's legit, but sometimes I think that reports like this, they could just have a grain of truth in them. Like there has been reaching out, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen now, Kevin, because where the hell is TFC going to fit another midfielder?
And again, we talked about Zlatan going to Philadelphia this year, so you just never know. We talk about those things or rumors or players on negotiation list, or there's a lot more ways to get into an MLS team than just one. And sometimes they're feelers. Sometimes you talk and you ask questions, but it never goes further than that. Yeah,
look, I mean, we'll see. Obviously, I think a lot of TFC fans have long dreamt of having a pure number 10 play here. To set up Javinko, and they wonder what that would look like. I don't think anyone thinks that Bradley is necessarily that player anymore. If he ever was, it's really service has always been an issue with Javinko in the last couple of years, and he kind of has to create for himself a lot. And we saw what happened over the 7-game stretch. Then, of course, we saw what happened on the weekend too. But that's kind of dream stuff for TFC if they could bring someone like that in. But I think that if this has any element of truth to it, it would be for next year. This would be something that you would have to make some room because, again, look at that midfield and try and figure out when they all get healthy how they're going to play them. Like, yeah, Benoit Giroux playing really well right now. How do you take him out of that midfield when Bradley comes back? You're not going to not start Bradley when he comes back. It's Bradley's team, basically, right? Will Johnson's got to fit in there. Jonathan Osorio's didn't even start last week and didn't see the field. So there's lots of questions about this. And that's to say nothing of the kids that play out wide. Now that Ricketts is in town, is Ricketts a forward? Is he a midfielder? There's lots of questions there. It's a packed midfield, and it's going to be hard to find positions and playing time for all of them, Kevin.
Speaking of packed midfields, Duane, since our last show, we recorded yesterday's show Sunday afternoon before the confirmation that Hernan Bernardello, former Montreal Impact midfielder, has signed he is back with the Montreal Impact. It was probably the worst kept secret in the circles of the Montreal Impact over the last few days. We kind of expected him, not because of just the rumors, and we know there was a back chat between the two sides, but if you're looking at practically the moves the Montreal Impact made, Porter out, bring in a defender, liberate a little bit of cap space, but more importantly, the trade that followed with Eric Alexander to Houston for Gam, Tam, and space on the cap, all those things together equaled the return of Hernan Bernardello, which people might forget because now you always see the past with rose-colored glasses. He did have a lot of good games, Montreal Impact, but his discipline and emotionally control, he had trouble emotionally on the pitch. He was getting a little too angry, a little too chippy, and he was getting in card trouble. Hopefully, he's more mature. He's 29 now. He's on his prime, I would say, and maybe now you learned a couple things how to not necessarily overreact, especially in a league like MLS where you will get carded if you do so. So Hernan Bernardello back around with the Impact.
Yeah, well, the Impact have throughout their MLS time been a team that's struggled with keeping those emotions under check and getting those cards under check, Kevin. So you're going to have to address that because I do believe it is something that has held that team back a little bit. I don't know why that is the case, but I think maybe some teams just get a reputation with the referees and it sort of gets out of control. So hopefully that will be.
Just look at Piatti once again. He never gets the call that he should just because they have the perception that he's always diving because of the way he looks when he's handling himself out there. Sometimes just demeanor they can just not like the way you handle yourself and think you're flailing around when maybe that's just how you move.
Yeah, we'll talk about refereeing a bit in that segment. We were talking about Tampa Bay. Certainly, I think Javenko is the same way because he's a little guy and he gestures and he yells at the referees all the time, and he's constantly he's very Italian out there. He's constantly hand gesturing at them and holding them and his body language and all that he doesn't get the call because I think that they're humans and they're influenced by human emotions. When they see a guy like that falling all the time, they're like, well, he's diving even when he's clearly been chopped down, which happens all the time. And I think a lot of the talent players in MLS, unfortunately, get the short end of the stick with that. I don't think this league does enough to protect its stars. But at any rate, let's move on from that right now. We'll get into that a little bit more. A couple other quick points here. Nat Borchers, I think we should mention that. It's one of the true sort of warriors of MLS, that he's an MLS lifer like Kevin and I talk about. That's a top-end talent guy that won a MLS Cup last year, was like the key piece in Portland's run. His Achilles heel snapped on the weekend. It didn't look good at the time. We found out the next day that it wasn't good. He's done for the year. He might be done for good.
That's a tough injury, Duane. Those injuries, when you're talking about an Achilles heel, talking about tendons in your knees, those type of injuries for a soccer player, especially for one that plays in Portland, can be a game changer. You are never necessarily the same player once after that.
And Borchers is one of those guys, and maybe when we have a slow day, we'll do this as an experiment of what an MLS Hall of Fame would look like. Not a U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame, not a Canadian Soccer Hall of Fame, just a Major League Soccer Hall of Fame. And I think he'd be a guy that you would have a conversation about whether or not he would be an MLS Hall of Famer. That's an interesting talking point for maybe down the line, because I do think that his age, playing on turf there, it becomes hard to see how you overcome that, Kevin.
Yeah, and it's a shame too, because it's if you would ever design the player to fit with one team, you would design Nat Borchers to field to play for Portland. His last season last year and won the MLS Cup over there. It's like a match made in heaven. Just the attitude of a Nat Borchers, what he brings to the supporters' culture, the beard in Portland. Let's face it, it's great chemistry between the two, and it's a shame that the soul almost of this championship team is gone for the year.
All right, fair enough. All right, last sort of bullet point I wanted to get into off the top. Yedlin, Spurs, their suggestions whether they might move on, permanent move to Sunderland has been what most people think is going to happen there. But then there's been some people that are backtracking on that. Just an interesting story if you're a U.S. national team fan to follow, whether Yedlin, sort of even just an MLS fan that's interested to see how those players do when they move on. I do think that probably he's a guy that is better off playing, period. And I think a lot of this is the Klinsmann argument. Well, it's not it's an anti-Klinsmann argument in a way, because he ignores guys that are playing all the time in Major League Soccer for guys that aren't playing for European teams. I think that's a bit of a problem. But I think that the fact that you need guys playing, that's the bottom line. If you're on an international level, here in Canada, we have this conversation all the time. And it's better to play at Sunderland than it is to sit in the bench at Spurs, even if Spurs is a better team. And a lot of U.S. men's national team fans, I think they struggle with that because they want their players playing for Champions League type teams. If Spurs is that, they are this year, but we'll see moving forward. Nonetheless, I think it's probably a good move for him if he does end up getting a permanent move to Sunderland because he's playing and excelling there. And why would you want that?
Well, when you excel somewhere, when you thrive and you finally break that glass ceiling as a player, as you might finally make your spot in the Premier League as a left back for Yedlin, you kind of grow fond, and the relationship between him and the supporters have actually bloomed last year with Sunderland, and he really made a home for himself there. So when you do get comfortable, you do see what can happen. You see what you do, you know the amount of effort you put in, and you see your result, and you have the confidence of your coach, and you're getting to a positive environment, and you're starting to thrive. You kind of want to stay in that environment and continue to thrive and see where you can just where you can bring this team or your play or your career. And this is maybe the launching pad that he actually needed to make his reputation in England. And if it has to be with Sunderland, guess what? It might be a better option than Tottenham, because playing once every 2-3 weeks and only for 15 minutes or just playing League Cup, it's not going to cut it for Yedlin.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we will break down 1 year later of Drogba.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Drogba. Kevin, can you believe it's been a year?
No, first of all, the year just flew by, and I just can't remember. This is maybe a little less than a year ago. It was beginning of August, if I don't remember correctly, when Drogba arrived at the airport, Duane. The scenes of madness with 1,500, 2,000 people in the airport chasing, surrounding Drogba, singing Drogba, sha-la-la-la-la. It was, to this day, just talking about it, I have goosebumps. Not because it's Drogba, not because I actually have been a fan of Drogba for, as millions of people, for many, many years before, and it was like a silent dream of mine to see him with the Montreal Impact, but just that energy, the room, the vibe, the buzz when he was buzzed. That's the right word. When he was in town, you actually have goosebumps just talking about it.
Yeah, and you talk about that initial reaction, and it was a very passionate reaction. It was a very Montreal reaction. Montreal's a passionate town, and the way that they embraced him was as one of their own right away was something to behold. And a lot of people took a lot of joy in watching those videos that were shot at the airport, around the world even, right? And look, there's been a lot of positive about Drogba in those first few months, and I think we'll focus on that first. We'll get a little bit into the drama around December in a minute, but let's talk about when he first arrived here, and if you could put yourself back in his mind, Kevin. Were your expectations, I think they probably were, I know the answer, but were your expectations met in terms of what he could do on the field, or were they exceeded?
Oh, they were actually exceeded, because I was not expecting anything. If we go back to the Two Solitudes and Afterwards archives of last year, we talked about DP, and when the Drogba rumors started talking about Noel Butler being the first to talk about it in Montreal with his Chelsea connection, we were not sure if it was the right move, because, Drogba on the wrong side of 30. Does he come here for the right reason? Does he want to put in the work and get the results? Well, his first apparition, it was as a sub and was really not convincing at all. Then he started starting matches and scoring hat tricks and scoring goals and scoring 12 goals in 12 games, and kind of changed the way we saw him as a player. Everybody else grew 1 or 2 inches, was better by about 10 FIFA points if you were looking at the overall on FIFA, to explain how much better everybody was when Drogba stepped on the pitch. And that continued. And the game I saw Saturday, Duane, when this happened, when you had 3 goals for Didier Drogba, I really had the same feeling as last year, because he didn't create everything. Piatti did, but Drogba was there to finish. So it's not done. I don't think my expectations were exceeded. I do think so, but I don't think it's over as well. I think it's going to continue, and I think he just started playing the season, and I guess he's going to redo the blueprint he did last year.
Yeah, I mean, last year a lot of people pointed to the fact that it was a sprint for him to be, something that benefited him at his. You said the wrong side of 30. He said the wrong side of 35. So let's be honest here. So a lot of people thought that the sprint aspect of last season really benefited him to come in and just have to focus on finishing that year. Whereas this year, with the full season to warm in, and I guess this is sort of where we can segue a little bit into the drama of the off season. Now in hindsight, having seen the 3-goal performance in the weekend and having some hope there, I think he has to replicate that, maybe not a hat trick every game, but has to replicate strong performances moving forward for you to completely buy in that it was the right approach. But the fact that he didn't start the season with the team, and the fact that he wasn't there for the start of the season, and there was all this concern about him moving back to Chelsea, all forgiven now?
Well, in a fan point of view, yes. And if you're looking at, you go back before that started. Patrick Fiolet of RDS, Duane, talked about how he believes and he heard about Drogba just starting in May to ease the calendar, ease the work rate, ease the aches and pain on the legs, on the body. And he does get fouled a lot as well, so that doesn't help. But they wanted to ease him into the season. And, well, it's MLS. And we just go back to every conversation we have about MLS, Duane. It's a league that it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And if you finish strong, you have a shot at it all. And that's a feeling that we do get if Drogba starts now his run through the season. And he already has like 8 goals, I believe, this year. So it's not like he hasn't been playing good at all. He just hasn't had the same impact, no pun intended, on the club as last year, because last year was just like poof, overwhelming. It's different this year, but he's there and he's starting to click, and Piatti is the key. And if Drogba's there on support, that's what he can do, bury rebounds like he did on Saturday, and that is very worthy. But Drogba, for me, I think, yeah, it's forgiven, it's more forgotten, and it's back on the pitch. And he's really emotional right now, the loss of his aunt earlier this week, so it was really emotional after the game, but he was happy to score the 3 goals. He actually felt relieved. So you know what, the playing career of Drogba is probably going to end of this season, but he's still got some goals in those legs.
Well, yeah, I was going to say you're around him enough to sort of get some kind of insight into whether or not this might be the end. I mean, most of us think it is. Is he carrying himself like someone who knows that this is one last sprint until he's done? No,
but he carries himself like it's hard to read how Drogba carries himself because he's such a superstar. And in all the word, he has an entourage, and he knows how to handle himself where you cannot read him. His poker face is his normal face, and he only allows himself to be readable in poker terms in some part of the game after he scores a goal, and sometimes in a post-game scrum, which never lasts really long. And this time, people actually, you know what, you said enough. You're actually, you said all you had to say, and he had that, not that he's going to start crying, that's not what I want to say, but his heart on his sleeve, really. He was à fleur de peau, I would say in French, he was so happy to have scored the goals, and the emotion of the passing of his family members and all that. It had a weird feeling, and I felt like playing was maybe therapy for him on that night. And so that feeling, maybe I'm mistaken, but that's really the feeling I had on Saturday night. So yeah, he does feel like a player that's going to stop playing at the end of the season, but he does enjoy himself on the pitch. Look at the performance he did on Saturday, tracking back at the 70-something minute to slide and save a clear goal opportunity. So, he still has that fire anyway. So I do not feel he's a player that feels like he's going to stop playing, but we know he is.
Yeah, the only question I have on that, and I agree that he likely is, I mean, the Chelsea coaching rumors were pretty strong, and I think it was pretty clear that he was torn. He was quite ambivalent about whether he should go there or go back and fulfill his contract.
Yeah, all signs pointed to it, not just what he says, but the action he took, the silence that he took on social media, which is very uncharacteristic. So no, there was a lot of signs pointing to that he was torn.
Yeah, I mean, hell, we did a show when we were convinced at that point. I mean, we wouldn't have done the show if we weren't convinced that it was
We
done.
had good sources, too, with Sofiane, and it was from L'Équipe d'Affaires that had a close source. Maybe it was done and things happened after that, like MLS lawyers calling him.
Yeah. I think that it was MLS lawyers. There might have been some. Do you really want to give us all this money back? That's quite a lot of money at any rate. I do wonder. The only caveat I have is he does seem to love playing. Very few players would come to MLS at his age and go to a city where you know that you're going to have so much attention put on you, because he could have hidden, I think, in a bigger market in MLS standards, and go to Montreal where, even with his Francophone backing and all that sort of stuff, he'd be a massive superstar there. And we're going to get there in a second.
Because people don't understand that Montreal is one of the markets in the league, like Toronto, that the coverage is a lot bigger surrounding the team than it used to be, and especially than the American counterparts. Like, it's not at the Montreal Canadiens level, but we're talking about 15, 16 people on the beat of the Montreal Impact almost now.
Yeah, and if you go to Chicago, which is the other team that basically had a claim in for him, they had to work that out, if we recall now. It's a big city, and he's going to get some attention when he arrives, but his day in, day out in Chicago is going to be a much different scenario than it is in Montreal, where he's expected to carry it. So the point I'm making is you don't make that decision unless you love playing. So the only thing I could say in terms of his impending retirement is if the Impact structured some kind of creative deal, which allowed him to come back for, like, say, July next year and just play another half season.
Just play when he wants. And then, well, yeah, exactly. Like what he did with Chelsea, too, when they won the Real League in 2014.
Yeah, I could almost see that working. That, okay, well, you don't have to come to camp, and we'll leave a spot open, and we'll structure your deal in such a way. I don't know if MLS would be happy with that, because it would sort of be a bit
precedent, yeah.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I could see that, although I do think we'll probably see him coaching in the Chelsea youth system next year, is what I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. But one thing that we have to mention, and this is to his credit, Didier Drogba got here, and he was surprised by many things, and he mentioned that often. He was surprised by the type of physical play in the league. He was surprised by the travel, the attention of the league, all those things. Instead of just bitching about it, he worked harder, got better on the pitch to be able to be effective, acclimatized himself really quickly to the league, and was able to be effective after his first start. On top of that, adjusted to the media presence that is in Montreal. Last year, he was doing so reluctantly. This year, it hasn't been an issue at all. And, when you have those situations with Didier Drogba, he carried himself more than professionally, adjusted, and did every single thing that he's asked for. Almost. You can always go back to that January hoopla, but that's been forgotten. So you know what? Didier Drogba has been more than, I think he fulfilled more than his end of the contract, Duane, in every single sense of that conversation. And I have to say, I am impressed by Didier Drogba in every single sense of the word. He is quite a man.
Yeah, he had a mature handling of the way he dealt with the media stuff. And look, that's legit for folks that come over here. Like, we saw it here in Toronto with Defoe, where that was, I maintain, one of the biggest reasons why he quit. He just couldn't handle the idea that he had to talk to these people after his games. I remember.
Yeah, well, one day I'll tell a story and we'll see. But Drogba just adjusted and did so truly professionally. Because you're right. The first day they come in, like, you have to talk to people. What? After I've done what? Exactly.
Yeah, it's just counter to them. They do mixed zones over there, and they can hide from them quite easily, right? So it's just different. I mean, like I said, Defoe never got used to it. He never adjusted to it. He never liked it. He hid from it. He didn't appreciate being criticized for the way that he handled his groin injury. And even though I think had Defoe come over with the right attitude, and this isn't Defoe conversation, it's not going to belabor this, but had he come over with the right attitude, he could have been a brilliant player in this league for many years, and could have been scoring goals with a boatload. But because he couldn't handle that, he didn't. And I think that's credit to Drogba that he has been able to do so. All right, let's get to that question that I wouldn't let you answer before. Is Drogba the best athlete to ever represent a Montreal team?
Internationally, to the scale and to the stage, not the way Montrealers or Canadian North American views Drogba, but how the world views him. Yes, nobody has ever been representing Montreal Impact or the city in an effect like a Didier Drogba. Talking about one of the top 5 to this day name in the world of soccer. Beckham, Rooney, Messi, Ronaldo, Drogba. It's a name that's in that conversation. Never would we have expected in our wildest dream in 2012 that a player like this came in, and it started slowly. We started Caradi, then Devayo, Nesta, slowly getting players that were more recognizable. There was always a building process needed for the players to the market before they come in, so they receive that star. Devayo was built for like 4 months before he came in. When he arrived, oh yeah, he's a star. but 4 months ago, nobody knew who he was. Drogba was not the case, Duane. It's something special. It's one of the best players of his nation. He revolutionized his country more than just on a sporting level. Talking about a mega superstar in the world of not just sports, but in sports celebrity in a way. Foundations, talking about many, many different parts of a Didier Drogba brand. For me, this is the biggest sports star or the biggest star this city has ever had in his limits. For me, it's something different. Of course, if you're looking at the Montreal perspective, there's going to be players or teams or Maurice Richard or other players like this that represented the city for them in a bigger scale. But it's not about them. It's how it's viewed internationally now. And Drogba there's no other comparison.
Yeah, that was my sports podnet soccer today question today. Is Drogba the greatest athlete to represent Montreal in any sport? No, that's my my responses because I was being bilingual.
And it was a we or no. And usually when we talk about this question in bilingual, we're not talking about sports. We're talking about politics. But who won, the we or the no?
It is the no, up 66-34.
Yeah, just like in real life.
Yeah, there you go. Look, and there's a lot of responses to this. Actually, I'll read some of them on the Twitter. This is from Arnold DeVry. Love him, aside from his alleged injuries, and loathe the team, but it's Price's town for now. I don't know if Price is the greatest athlete to ever represent Montreal, but anyway.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying. It depends on your perception. If you don't see soccer as the most important sports worldwide, first of all, you might be delusional. But second of all, because it's not your number one sport, so for your perception is going to be biased a bit. But if you go as a scale globally, there's no other comparison whatsoever. Price, go ask somebody in Africa who carry prices.
Yeah,
guess what your answer will be?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Big fish in a small little pond when you're talking about hockey. Eric is a Montrealer. It seems. It said this guy has more followers on Facebook than there are people living in Quebec. Who has ever had that reach? No one.
Fair, very, very good point, Eric. I have to say, the mic. I just heard the mic drop right there.
Yeah, there you go. A couple of Pedro Martinez is a former Expo. Someone's mentioned Scott, who I know suggested I'm on drugs. Not at the moment, Scott. All right. Who else? Seriously,
does Diet Pepsi count as a drug?
Yeah, well, it's caffeine. Mathieu says, who else? Seriously, I want only one name greater than him. Phil, who's lives in BC. He played in France for a while too, so he's got some francophone roots. Maybe if he played for Impact in his Chelsea prime, but current Drogba versus Richard, Lafleur, Bellevue, no way. So there's your responses to that question. It's an interesting barstool conversation, as I said, and it doesn't really have to have a right answer. It's just something to think about. My personal take on it is that in terms of reach, yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, it's not even close. In terms of talent level while he was there, maybe a Guy Lafleur, maybe Patrick Roy,
Carey Price, Piqué Subban.
Yeah. If Nashville had an MLS team, we could have that debate maybe down the line. But
next year, got to talk about USL at least. Maybe tomorrow on the USL show, we could talk about Piqué Subban in Nashville. Maybe Piqué Subban will be a fan of the Nashville FC.
There you go. Maybe he will be. He's a fan of Johnny Cash. I love PK. PK, of course, played for my beloved now defunct Bubble Bulls. So. It's much more. I got to tell you with the PK thing that we have because I'm a huge PK fan. I have been because he played for the OHL team that I supported. So obviously I was a PK fan. He's a Torontonian as well. But when he went to Montreal as a Torontonian, I had to feel a little torn about that because you want PK to do well, but it's the Habs for God's sakes. Now that he's gone, all that ambivalence is gone. So whatever. The Habs are self-destructive. The Habs have become the Leafs. How did that happen, Kevin?
Let's go to a break.
Okay.
I miss you, PK. You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe. And give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Having a dance party here.
Where's the light sticks? Are you part of Tomorrowland or something?
Tomorrowland. I see that stuff all over my. I like EDM, I do, but I am way too old to go to that.
Without feeling creepy. I get your drift. Speaking of being too old and feeling creepy, the Tampa Bay Rowdies CEO made quite a statement on the rowdysoccer.com website about some critics, a lot of criticism about the refereeing.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm just going to read this, Kevin, because it's worth reading.
Just go ahead. Just read it because it carries every single thing we need to say.
All right. This is the CEO and the chairman, CEO, and Governor Bill Edwards. That's a lot of titles too, by the way, Bill. But anyway, let me just catch my breath here for a second. To Rowdies fans and family, I have been quiet all season about the poor officiating that has been taking place at Rowdies matches. But after Saturday's night match against the Cosmos, I feel compelled to speak out. It's become clear that these calls are not going to, quote unquote, even themselves out over the remainder of the year. As Stewart, his coach, said after the match, the officiating was disgusting. It was the last straw in what I believe to be a season full of inconsistent, incompetent, and unprofessional refereeing. And while it's easy to dismiss it as, quote unquote, just a game, these bad calls can affect the lives and livelihoods of everyone associated with the club. We have submitted the official NESL officiating evaluation form after every match, pointing out these deficiencies along the way. It seems these reports have been ignored. While I recognize that referees are human, I firmly believe that we have the right to expect fair and consistent treatment no matter the referee, the opponent, or the venue. Our coaches and players work too hard to have their efforts negated by bad calls. Our fans deserve better also. You pay good money to see a professional soccer match. Poor officiating affects your experience and possibly your desire to come back. Fans, I want you to all know that I am doing something about it. Some may say it's just sour grapes. To them, I say, watch this video and see just a sample of the bad calls the team has endured during the 2016 season. Then you make the decision. Good refs, bad refs, let the league know how you feel. Come on, you Rowdies. C-O-Y-R. The season isn't over yet. Let's make some noise. Bill. Okay.
Okay. First of all, there's a couple of fair points where you ask that it's fair to have games that are referredly in a fair manner. That I agree with. The thing I don't agree is, well, Bill Edwards, have you watched any of the games? Because the way you highlight the problems here, just in Rowdy's match, there's other league games that are happening. It's not just about the Rowdies. It's a league-wide situation. It's a whole, and you cannot just highlight a situation like this, and you have to watch and you have to understand in context things, and you can't just say strong words like this. I don't believe.
Yeah, look, if the video that he's referring to, I watched it this morning, and there are some bad calls in it. I mean, I think you can find bad calls with any team, any league in the world, though, right? I mean, the first call, the offside call that he made was, it was terrible. It was a terrible decision, but
especially when you choose, Duane, when you choose which video you put. You can highlight anything you want. You can make that video say whatever you want because you just highlight the part that you want to put. But that's easy to do.
But what's telling about the video, too, is if you watch a little bit, you'll find yourself going, well, that's not that bad of a call. Or, well, I think that call's right. There's lots of, it's not exactly as black and white as I think Bill, with his a little bit of biased opinion, is seeing there. So, like I said, some of the offside calls are dead wrong, but hell, I go to MLS Live tonight and find 10 other calls that are dead wrong too.
Premier League, you'll see goals that are offside being lauded all the time. It's not just here. It's something that's bigger than just in one Rowdies match. You have to look at it more global.
Yeah, I was reading some of the reaction to this, and I read some referee reaction to it, which I'll get to in a minute, and I read some, kind of fan reaction, and the fans are sort of responding the way you'd expect. A lot of them are frustrated. A lot of fans in North America are frustrated with pro referees, right? The pro association is what I refer to. I wish they had a different name because it always sounds like you're just saying professional referees.
Yeah, and pro stands for Professional Referee Organization.
Yeah, so anyways, for pro. A lot of people are frustrated by them, so there's a lot of people going, "Yeah, go Bill," but it's kind of there's other fans that are sort of looking at it going, this is a little bit of sour grapes, and my team has just as much, so maybe Bill should just shut up. So there's a bit of that. The one good point that some fans did come to on the NASL side is that he has highlighted something in here that is a deficiency between the NASL and versus MLS, and USL, which are the other two leagues that use pro. And that is that he's filling out this form, the NASL officiating evaluation form, which is supposed to allow to some kind of post-match reviewing format that takes place and it sounds like that's not necessarily happening in any way that's beneficial to the clubs. That they're not necessarily getting feedback on their complaints, on their issues with the officials. I think that if you look at the way Major League Soccer handles it, we get frustrated by Disco, and that's like sort of the public face, or the face that affects the fans the most, is the Disco decisions to suspend after the fact. But there's also a process involved in which feedback goes back to the clubs with calls that have been made and their concerns with calls, so that they understand the rules, and it doesn't necessarily sound like that's happening in the NASL. And if that's the case, then that's a problem, because you should be constantly communicating. And I think that's, we've talked about before how it'd be better if the referees were a little bit more open about this stuff. But I do think that at the very least, you should expect that the clubs have some kind of open communication with the directors of officiating.
That's a fair point. But if you keep yelling at them all the time, eventually it's just noise. No, if you fill that report after every single game complaining about all the single issue, you're complaining about it, and it's fair. It's all well and good. You're filling your due process. But eventually they're going to feel it's just noise as well. So they're human beings on both sides. So as you mentioned in your letter, you do recognize that it's human being on the other side as well. So if you yell at somebody all the time, will he really go on your side after that? That's always a question as well.
Well, yeah, no. And again, you have to, there comes a certain time where you have to understand that it's beyond the fact that they're humans, that there's interpretation involved in the laws, right? That sometimes a referee is going to interpret a law slightly different than you might. And it's actually possible, within the way the laws are written, that you're both correct. That, it's not as black and white as people think. There is a little art to officiating that's out there. And that's frustrating to people because they want consistency, and we understand that. But it's a game, and it's fluid, and all those sort of things. So it's hard sometimes to get that down. Or you're right. If you just constantly badger them. And I see that when I'm out doing local games here, is the amount of abuse those guys get and then handle with grace, right? And I think that we don't always view them as human, because we don't always give them credit for being able to sit there and take constant friggin' abuse from people and just sort of roll with it for the most part, because they understand the emotions involved. And that's not something we'd expect out of any other profession, right?
No, exactly. And the way soccer is made too, there's no music going on in the background. If you're at lower level, you're close to the pitch, and if you talk just loud enough, referee's going to hear you. The amount of verbal abuse that they are seeing on a day-to-day basis, it's beyond people's expectation. They don't realize that. And this is part of the game too. Their safety, their judgment is something very important, and it's a game in motion. So it's easy when you're standing still looking at the game, not necessarily understanding the call, when the call and the game is actually playing in motion.
Yeah, there's this belief, I think, out there by people at the professional level that if you constantly are on a referee for something, that you'll get in their head and they might benefit them down the line. I sometimes wonder whether the opposite might not work too, whether if you're constantly respectful of them, that they might be willing to give you a break down the line, that they not consciously. That's not what I'm saying, because the whole idea is if you yell at a referee enough times, then the referee will you'll get in their head and he'll make a call that benefits you. But I'm wondering whether just constant respect to the referee and having a philosophy in a club to not abuse the officials might also have that same subconscious effect down the line. I wonder that.
Put it this way. If you yell at me every single time we do a show, I'm not going to necessarily put your microphone on a better sounding track because of that. You know what I mean? Just trying to draw a parallel here. But if we're always respectful and nice to each other, I might be willing to make it sound better. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of parallel I can draw. That's just me here. I'm talking for me. If you yell at me, I'm not going to be on your side. I'm sorry.
And if let's do an example that most of us know. If we're at a restaurant and we're screaming at our server, do you think the food's going to come out quick?
And yeah, exactly. No, you got to wait to trust me. I know that example.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Any final thoughts on that before we move on and talk about the mess in Vancouver right now with Espinola?
You know what? He does raise his fair point where as a professional setting, you do want a certain level, a certain high standards of refereeing. I agree. But are those not met? Well, it's kind of hard to tell when both sides are biased when they evaluate. You would kind of need a third party to come up with a way to evaluate how the refereeing is. You know what? We talk about the refereeing in sports way too much anyways. Let's just talk about the sports, or maybe lack thereof if we go back to Vancouver.
All right. If you want to watch that video, it's on the Rowdies YouTube page. You can also just find it at Rowdies Soccer. That's ROWDIES soccer.com. If you want to track that down, it's worth watching because, as I said, it's not really as black and white as I think Bill thinks it is. Let's take a quick break. Come back and talk about the trade that isn't a trade, or is it?
Hey, it's Kevin of the Sports Podcasting Network. On SPN, on top of What's the Score, the Sports News Quiz, you can find a plethora of great sports podcasts. Hardwood Radio, Gridiron Radio, Sports, It's in the Game, Scuderia F1, the second most listened to F1 podcast in the whole world, Soccer Today, live radio shows like Open Lines After Dark, MLS Postgame Show, Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast, Off the Woodworks, and much, much more. All that on the Sports Podcasting Network.com.
All right, so last week we talked about how the Whitecaps had made maybe what was even kind of a clever move to bring in Espinola in as a sort of rental for the rest of the season, sort of address some of their shortcomings. I'm going to take that term clever back, Kevin.
You take it back. How about you start, Duane, by just explaining the situation, what it is right now?
Yeah, on the weekend, we reported that he wasn't on the bench, and a lot of people thought, oh, that's kind of weird. Maybe they're going to sell him immediately on. Maybe there was some kind of arrangement in play that they were bringing in this guy, arranging sort of how the allocation would be split up. I don't know how that would have benefited DC necessarily. I guess they get the international spot back, or whatever it was, scam or whatever the hell they traded them. I forget now. Anyway, but I don't know necessarily how that benefits Vancouver because they're giving some up to get more, whatever. We thought maybe there was something creative going on, but then it turns out that he's just not reporting right now. And the factor that's going on is that this is the guy that was planning to move back to closer to where he's from in the offseason to begin with. He was going to finish his season at DC United and then move on. Now, DC United has decided to trade him to Vancouver across the entire continent into a different country. Well, his wife is 3 months pregnant or some damn thing. Well, they have a very young child as well. So he is faced with a choice, and this is the reporting that we're hearing out there. He's now being faced with the choice to either go across the country while his wife is pregnant, and is trying to take care of a little kid, and leave them alone for 4 months, or drag them all the way across the country into a different country. And we sometimes, I think, forget about the human aspect of a trade like that, and he's just basically said no.
It goes even further than that, Duane. If you're looking at the timetable, his wife, she's pregnant, and in 6 months she'll be in Vancouver, and if she gives birth, well, their kid is Canadian. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of implication about this trade, about how it changes somebody's life. And you mentioned it, yeah, we forget the human aspects. Sometimes we have that thing, oh, they're paid millions of dollars or few hundreds of $1,000s in that case to just be professional and just go up and move. How would you feel if you work at a clothes store in, let's use an example everybody knows, at Times Square. So you're in Times Square, you work there, and one day your boss comes and like, hey guys, there's been a trade. You've been traded. You're not working for Target anymore. You're going to work for Walmart, but you're going to go work for Walmart in Paducah, Kentucky. So just pack up your move. You got 3 days to get there, and your first shift is in 4 days. They're waiting for you. How would you feel?
Yeah, well, you might tell them to stuff it. And the reason you might tell them to
that's exactly what he's saying.
The reason you might tell them to stuff it, the reason you would tell them to stuff it is because there's other Walmarts, there's other Targets that you could work at in the New York area where you wouldn't have to move and disrupt your whole family. And
who wants to go to Paducah, Kentucky anyways? But that's another discussion.
Yeah, everyone uses poor Paducah, but anyway.
Because it's so easy, but yeah, sorry, Paducah.
Soccer is a global market. The other North American sports where we accept the idea of trading, and I don't know why we do, but put that aside for a second, they're not really global markets. There are other leagues, yes, but there's clearly the best leagues in the world are here. The NBA is clearly the best basketball league in the world. The NHL is clearly the best hockey league in the world. The NFL is, well, it's the NFL. It's the only one that exists.
The NFL
right?
is clearly better than the CFL.
And yes, and Major League Baseball is clearly better than your Japanese and Korean leagues out there. So if you want to play at the top level and make anything close to the money that you're making, you have to stay in those leagues. So you accept the idea that you can be traded. I don't think it's necessarily the most labor-friendly kind of philosophy that exists out there, but you exchange that for being well compensated, basically. But in soccer, in MLS, you're talking about a minor player in the world of football trying to act in a way and trying to exist in a way that is different from the rest of the global market. So a player like that looks at it, who can go anywhere in the world he wants when he's at a contract in 6 months, and just goes, why in hell would I go over there? That makes no damn sense to me. The only thing he's given up for this is money, which is, not insignificant, but nonetheless, if he's taken care of his money well and has something lined up for next year, then he probably can afford to say, you know what, I'm going to stay back and take care of my family. And I think a lot of people, most people, if they have any human instincts whatsoever, could respect that idea that this man's going to stay back to take care of his pregnant wife rather than drag himself across the continent. So I take a lot of issue with the idea that trading should even be permitted in Major League Soccer without, at the very least, without some level of cooperation with the player. And the other side of this is Mark Webber reported that Vancouver was not given permission to talk to him before he came over. And to me, that seems a bit absurd from DC's perspective. Why are you denying them the opportunity to talk to the player so that they can at least find out whether he wanted to come? Because
they would have found out and not make the trade. That's exactly why they didn't want Vancouver to talk to him before.
Yeah. So look,
look at your DC shoes, Duane. You got something for him. He was going to leave anyways. Now you got something for him. It's almost that aspect. And we talk about like a loan deal. Vancouver thought, hey, we're getting like it could be good for us. Type of exactly what we need. He can come here for a few months. We convince him he stays for next year. They had that in mind, not what's going on right now.
Yeah, and if Weber's report is correct, then I don't think DC was particularly ethical here, and I'm going to give them a lot of blame. Now, I'm not going to completely take Vancouver off the hook, though, because there are ways you can talk to a player even when you don't have permission. You go through their agent, simply speaking. No one can deny you the chance to talk to an agent. Their teams don't have that control, right? So all you have to do is call the agent up, and you will know who the agent was because it's not that big of a world there, and go, hey, look, this is what's being talked about. Will he come? The agent hangs the phone up, texts his client. 2 minutes later, yeah, no, he's saying no. Yeah, that's all they really had to do. So I don't quite know why Vancouver didn't do that either. So I kind of put a little blame on Vancouver, but I give more blame to DC in this particular case if the scenario played out the way that we're suggesting it, because I just don't think it's good business. And, from DC's perspective, yes, they're going to get something out of it.
It's good business, but it's cutthroat and ruthless business.
And what goes around comes around. TFC used to do that back in the early days too. They would do crazy, aggressive things, and it bit them in the ass constantly because players would refuse to work with them.
Duane, DC will DC. You remember when D-Row left DC and they pulled down the banner when he was walking out of the stadium? How cruel was that?
Yeah,
it's a kind of a same thing repeating itself here.
Exactly. So it's you got to, and DC's not exactly been playing all that well in the last couple of years, have they now? Right. So
outside of a U.S. Open Cup win that they went to the Champions League when they were worst in the league. Nope, you're right.
Yeah, it's been a tough slug for them, and they tend to do things in a different kind of way. And I'm not too sure whether it's the right approach right now. But certainly, this is a problem though for Vancouver because they basically now have. They probably, I don't think there's any probably about this. This is what their plan was to get them through the second half of the season, likely with the idea that they could, he would move on and they would get some allocation back for that. And then they could use that allocation to buy a player in January when maybe they would have more time to do the negotiations needed to find the right player, the right fit. We often criticize Vancouver for not opening up the pocketbook, and I think that that's a worthwhile thing to criticize them for. But the reality is that their ownership group won't. So they need to be creative when they're bringing in guys like that, guys that are top end scorers, DP type guys, because they're going to have to find the right fit, a guy that's going to come in at the right price range, probably from the right part of the world. You're going to have to convince him to play on turf. You're going to have to convince him to come to bloody Canada. Lots of things like that, and they need time to do that. So it made a lot of sense. Now
you're saying Canada like it's a bad thing.
I'm not saying it's not a bad thing. I live here, but
I know. I'm just teasing.
From an outsider's perspective, it's like, oh, I'm going to Major League Soccer. LA, Chicago, New York, Vancouver?
Well,
Vancouver? What?
Kind of sexy. better than, I don't know. We keep seeing Columbus as an example because it's like great, but no, you're right.
There's nice parts to Columbus, but
Exactly.
Yes.
There must be, I guess.
It's the Arena District. It's very nice, actually. It's just kind of a Midwestern city, is all.
It's like the Yorkville of Columbus.
Yeah, there you go. At any rate, there's a certain amount of negotiation if you're not LA or New York, if for any MLS team, is kind of what I'm saying. And there's an added level of resistance among some players to come to Canada versus the United States, right? So it's just reality. Like, that's not hide from that. It's true. At any rate, so the point I'm making is that now all of this has been sped up, and suddenly Vancouver, because he's refusing to report, is sitting in a situation where they no longer have a frontline scorer for the second half of the season. And they're not that safe for a playoff spot yet. So there's a lot of work to be done. Now, the suggestion is that the league will probably help Vancouver figure this out because it's, he's basically a breach contract now. So they'll probably give Vancouver back the allocation is what will happen. But they still need to go find someone, right?
They actually do. And, we talk a lot about Giovinco and Drogba. They kind of have to find their own type of solution like this. Maybe open up the purse, maybe, but it's really there. They didn't catch a break, but maybe diligence wasn't due in the whole spectrum of things. Maybe didn't, like you mentioned, get all the knowledge available about how the player would feel about a potential trade and all that. So you kind of have to feel bad in the way that it's not necessarily what they would hope for, but it's getting late in the transfer window too. Who do you go for? Who do you go after? If you go with the history of the club, they haven't brought a big name type of just DP or player in the last few years that's able to impact the team in a way that we would expect. Rivero, we thought he was going to be that guy. Turns out it's not. So who is going to be the Drogba or Giovinco of Vancouver?
Yeah, and it's a tough slug. I mean, look, I don't know if Toronto gets enough credit for being creative enough to go out and find Giovinco. He wasn't an obvious DP target, but when you think about it, he should have been a guy that is on a top team in the world, like Juve is one of the top 10 teams in the world anyway, I'd say, who wasn't playing. That's the kind of player I think that you need to target, a guy that has ambition, that wants to be a leader on a team, that is at one of the elite teams in the world, but isn't quite going to break through there. If you can find those guys, and they're out there, and convince them, which will usually take a big check, to come over, then I think you can find lightning in the bottle. You can find guys like Giovinco out there. I don't think he's unique. There's more of them, more of them available.
But not just a big check, Duane. I think confidence and be able to build a project around somebody and make him feel important was maybe the key here for Giovinco. That can be replicated without having to spend $25 million.
Yeah, and the other part about him too, and I mean, this is just as a type of player rather than him specifically, is that he wasn't necessarily a name that, obviously, if you were a fan of Juve, if you were an Italian fan, if you were just even a guy that follows Serie A, you probably knew him, but you didn't necessarily look at him as a global superstar because he wasn't. But he was a player that had the talent level to excel in Major League Soccer. So Vancouver is in a market, just like Toronto was, that doesn't necessarily need that global superstar to sell tickets. They do okay in that manner, so they have that advantage already. They can go after a player rather than a player/marketing object. And that benefits them too. So and you save a little money too when you're not also bringing in the global superstar brand.
You don't pay for the name, of course.
Yeah, so they do have those advantages, but it's going to be very difficult. And that's not like, as much as I discount the argument that turf is more dangerous, and I do, the reality is, the perception is reality is what I'm trying to say with the players, right? So you do have to overcome that as well, and they do play on turf there.
Yeah, no, it's all a big question mark still, and we'll see where Vancouver goes from there, how they react to the situation, and if they can get their target and their goal scorer. That's what they've been missing. We've been talking about it for more than a year now. They need somebody to put that round leather inflated ball behind that white line.
Yeah, the final thought on this is, there still is obviously a chance that the league could, through, twist his arm or convince him somehow to show up. But I don't
make a phone call. Hi, this is MLS Lawyers here. You need to go back to Vancouver.
Yeah, but is that good for the Whitecaps? I don't know. Well, it depends on when he shows up and how motivated he is to show up. I mean, most players have enough pride that they're not going to mail it in completely, but you never know. I've seen it before. Carlos Ruiz. I can't talk today, Kevin.
Ruiz.
Carlos Ruiz, when he came to Toronto, absolutely did mail it in here. He didn't want to be here. He got traded here. This happened in 2008. I want to say 2008, 2009. I forget which. He came in and basically got like a red card and walked around the pitch for 20 minutes. He had no pride whatsoever in what he was doing. This is a guy that's still playing, so he could have, right? But yeah, so there's examples of that out there where guys just decide that they're not going to come in. So Vancouver, I don't know whether they want him at this point. I think if I were them, I'd be saying, you know what, let's just void this trade now and figure it out.
Hey, you're always better off with the girl that wants you than the girl that just wants to be with you.
Fair enough. All right, Kevin, on that note, as always, say goodbye.
Stay tuned to the Sports Podcasting Network. Five Rings Archery Preview drops today. Woo. And on top of it, to quote your words, who else is going to do an archery preview than the Sports Podcasting Network?
And real quickly, there'll be a few more coming down the pipe this week. I've been working on that on Sunday and a lot more this weekend, but I'll let you continue there. Lots of previews coming down the line.
Exactly, and a lot of shows on the Sports Podcasting Network. So visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com, on Twitter at SportsPodNet. And until tomorrow, 11 a.m. for another edition of Soccer Today, well, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.